imposing keep.
Just below the Great Court is another enclosure known as the cockpit, where the wall goes back to the late 11th century. Here we see some herringbone masonry, introduced presumably for purely decorative reasons. The stone is a mixture of sandstone and limestone, some of it very rubbly. These two stones, sandstone and limestone, have remained Richmond's principal building materials throughout the centuries. So when, in 1155, one of the constables of the castle founded the Abbey of St. Agatha at Easby, a mile down the River Swale, it was naturally these local stones to which he turned. Most of the stone here, as at the castle, is very rubbly. For the infilling of the walls, they principally relied, as was to be expected, on cobbles from the river, easily identified by their rounded shapes. There are lots of them. The frata, which was the refectory or dining hall of the monks, is the most impressive portion to survive. It was largely rebuilt about 1300, and the wall was then faced with well-dressed sandstone in quite sizable blocks. This stone is especially well seen in the richly moulded frames of the large windows on the side away from the cloister. These decorated windows must have been a fine sight when they were complete. In the east window, a good deal of the tracery still survives. Across the former precinct is the gatehouse, also about 1300. This has been carefully restored. The upstairs room has a pair of two-light windows, again with decorated tracery, and the ground floor is vaulted. Richmond itself came into being to serve the castle. Because of the river and the castle, the town, perched on its hill, hadn't much room to expand. It was, of course, walled, and one of the gates, Cornforth Bar, survives. Only one church, Holy Trinity, lay within the walls. This was never the parish church, and is now the Green Howards Regimental Museum. The parish church, St. Mary, was outside the walls, which was rather unusual, but perhaps the restricted area of the town didn't allow sufficient space for a burial ground. When the Grey Friars, the Franciscans, arrived in 1258, they too had to settle for an extramural site. Only the sandstone tower of their church remains. It was a central tower and dates from the 15th century. Although modest compared with some Yorkshire towers of the Perpendicular period, it is a great ornament to the town. When this tower went up, medieval Richmond had reached just about the zenith of its prosperity. The medieval market cross doesn't survive, having been replaced in 1771 by this weird-looking obelisk. Richmond had been a market town from as far back as 1155, only 10 years, that is, after it obtained its first charter in return for an annual rent to the Earl of Richmond, the feudal lord. It was a general market for corn, butter, cheese, also for wool, hides, timber, iron, and lead. By 1450, the population was round about 2,000, but by this time, markets had opened in other North Yorkshire towns, so this one declined in importance. For nearly 3 centuries after 1500, the people here kept themselves alive principally by knitting. They knitted woolen stockings and woolen caps, particularly for sailors. Everyone knitted. Wool was now the paramount product. Kept themselves alive, yes, but prosperous, no. So, from this period, little survives. Of the old timber-frame town, nothing. And from the 17th century, only a handful of stone houses, considerably restored and much altered. In the 18th century, most of the building material at Richmond was still stone, all of which was quarried locally. Less than a mile from the marketplace towards the northwest, there were 2 limestone quarries. This one, for a number of years, was in the ownership of the former borough council. Both are now worked out, but were still in use well into the present century. It's a very hard stone, but with hammers and iron bars and wedges, it could be quarried without any recourse to blasting. Here's one of the many houses built of this stone. There was never any question, of course, of a smooth ashlar finish. It's much too hard for that. But the rough texture suits this town very well. A house built as recently as 1936, Hergill Lodge, shows this local limestone to excellent effect. It's not just a facing, it's solid stone throughout, and with periodical repointing this house will last for centuries. There are worked out quarries of sandstone too, within carting distance of the town, as here at Gatherley Moor, some 4.5 miles to the north. Where freestone was needed, it just had to be sandstone. This is a hard stone too, but not as hard as the limestone, and it can be sawn if required. It's mostly either sandy brown or, as here, dull pink, under the lichen. It could be obtained in quite large blocks, as indeed it was early in the present century, for the finely masoned front of a bank in the marketplace. But most sandstone buildings are not ashlared, nor was there any call for it here. How satisfying this stonework is, isn't it? On a typical no-nonsense-about-it Yorkshire townhouse of the late 18th century. Sandstone, in the form of hard cobbles, was also taken from the riverbed, and used not only for paving, but for building too, and can be seen in some of the older cottages. So there's limestone or sandstone wherever we look. In some places they're quite distinct. Here at the castle, for example, the keep is of sandstone, with the blocks shaped and at least roughly dressed, whereas the walls are largely of undressed limestone. So close are these two stones geologically, there are plenty of buildings in Richmond in which, as here, it's really very difficult to distinguish them. Both, of course, belong to the Carboniferous system, which means that they're over 300 million years old. And it can happen that the ingredients of the two stones are mixed. Thus, some of the stone in this neighborhood, more often it's true on farms up the dale rather than in the town itself, is known as bastard. Progeny, we might say, of a limestone father and a sandstone mother. But whether bastard or no, This stone surely deserves better than to be hidden away beneath this huge Virginia creeper. It's a pity, too, that the windows have lost their glazing bars, which formerly divided them into 12 small lights. This group of houses, once a source of architectural pleasure, could now better serve as a bird sanctuary. It was the sandstone which supplied the slabs for all the older roofs. A fair number survive, and their sombre splendour suits the locality to perfection. But stone slates as massive as these, which can weigh as much as a ton to every 100 square feet, demanded very strong support. So, as the wooden framework decayed, there was always a temptation to replace it with something lighter, which could only carry the smaller Welsh slates, or tiles. Neither of these suits Richmond's stone buildings nearly so well, but on brick buildings tiles are perfectly appropriate. The tiles here are not plain but pan, as usual in the northeast. Pan tiles, which first reached England from Holland in the 17th century, can be very enjoyable. They are larger than plain tiles, and the rhythmical surging of the courses yields a very satisfying texture. They are usually red, and though there are reds and reds, the tiles here are much more attractive than the bricks. The King's Head in the marketplace is the only notable brick building in Richmond, and dates from the Georgian period. Bricks weren't used in this town before the 18th century, and even here the dressings are of stone. Nor, to be frank, is Richmond's brickwork really very attractive. The reason is that they just didn't have the best clays here, as they did in the south and east. These hard carbonaceous clays, as can be seen in many parts of the north, lack the plasticity of other and younger clays, and they don't fire to such agreeable shades. That's a matter of their chemical composition. But at least these are not the harsh reds of some parts of Lancashire or the Midlands. A building here with a rather special character is the theatre. This was opened in 1788, closed in the 1840s, and reopened in 1963. The story of its restoration is really quite exciting. What emerged was the best preserved and, without question, the most authentic Georgian theatre in the country. The restoration was carried out through a trust administered largely by local people, and the theatre now provides Richmond with a charming setting for plays and music, both by amateurs and by visiting professionals. Before the restoration, the auditorium had a floor flush with the stage, and the pit was filled by a vaulted wine cellar, fortunately removable without damage to the structure. The painted scenery is the oldest in England. It dates from 1836. The stage is rather narrow, but it is deep, and perspective effects are therefore excellent. There used to be 3 trapdoors, one there, and one just where I'm standing. And no doubt there was machinery to allow the actors to rise on platforms and disappear into the depths. I shall make a more sedate exit. I'm now in one of the boxes, which I may say is no guarantee of a good view of the stage. But that is true of theatre boxes the world over. This theatre has been redecorated in the original colours, mainly shades of green, based on this panel immediately below me here, which is the one original one to have been recovered. To do that, they had to remove no fewer than 6 over-paintings. The red lining of the boxes behind me here is also based on the original scheme. And on the lintels over the doors are paintings of the masks of comedy and tragedy within a swag, which are also original. The theatre seats 237 people, and it must be said, for comfort, the shorter you are, the better. All the same, it's good that Richmond has this tiny living theatre, because, as the late Ivor Browne observed, the little town is itself a piece of theatre, surging dramatically up from the gorge of the Swale to its castle, its market, and its clustered hillside homes. Artistically, one of the best legacies of the Georgian period is undoubtedly Richmond Bridge, which is exactly contemporary with the theatre. It's an extraordinary story. The old bridge over the Swale was destroyed by a flood in 1771. Now the southern half belonged to the county, and the northern half to the corporation. This led to years of bickering. The architect was John Carr of York, but there were separate contracts and separate contractors, and it's said that the county's half was finished 3 years before the town's. But how you halve a 3-arch stone bridge worries me, I must confess. It's a very handsome structure, built of that hard sandstone from the quarry at Gatherley Moor. In Newbiggin, just off the Market Square, is a most individual building in the other Georgian style, Gothic with a K, Gothic, a Georgian improvisation on the medieval Gothic. Two fields away, and even more remarkable, is Culloden Tower, built in 1747. It's a fine building, splendidly sited, where once had stood a peel tower, a keep standing in isolation of which the existing rectangular base of rubble stone may well be a part. The 2 upper stories, faced with smooth sandstone, are octagonal, and at one corner there's a projecting stair turret. Within, there were once 2 good rooms, but now, alas, time and hooligans have done their worst. Is in the private park of Temple Lodge, believed to have been built in 1769. The house itself is also Gothic, but was enlarged about 1850. The castellations must be early Victorian. The effect is decidedly picturesque. And there's none of that rather gimcrack-looking cement rendering, which all too often disfigures buildings of this type. All here is good sandstone. From the front door, we can move straight to a more spectacular example in the same style here. The date of this door is known, 1848. It belongs to what, until it was closed about 1963, was Richmond's railway station. The station was an excellent building by the Yorkshire architect G.T. Andrews. And what's so splendid, we can say in this case not only was, but is. For it was bought by the district council, who have leased it as a garden centre.
Well, this is a shining example of what enterprise and imagination can do to save an excellent building no longer required for its original purpose. What an object lesson we have here. All over the country there are still stations, well over 1,000 of them, some of them really well designed and perfectly capable of adaptation, and yet they are left standing empty and a prey to vandals. It's a tragedy. Some of our most enjoyable Victorian buildings are, or were, stations. And it's sheer folly to leave them to be vandalized when they could be transformed and put to really good use, as this one has been.
The Richmondshire District Council have gone further. Not only have they bought the station, but over 2 miles of the former track as well, and turned it into a most agreeable walk, perhaps the pleasantest way of getting from Richmond to Easby Abbey. Full marks again to the council. Why isn't this done too, far more often? I wish everything here was as good. In the 30s, with an expanding population and admittedly no planning legislation, there was this. If houses have to look commonplace, shouldn't they be decently concealed? But still worse, and quite recently, we find this. How can planning permission have been given for such architectural eyesores as these? So prominently sited and so manifestly built of the wrong materials. But to their great credit, in 1965, the corporation rebuilt 2 houses in Newbiggin as 6 flats. Much of the original stone was salvaged for this new rubble stone front. They scrupulously adhered to the building line and the roof line of the street. Another excellent example of post-war council housing is St. James's Chapel, Wynd, built almost entirely in the local stone, a mixture of sandstone, limestone, and river cobbles. And recently, at the foot of Tower Hill, an ugly building has been taken down and replaced by 3 well-designed single-storey houses for the elderly. Now, the demolition revealed a view of the castle not seen for over a century. The central chimney would have ruined this view. But it remains unimpaired because the architect, with the most commendable sensitivity, shifted this stack to one side.
All these are very encouraging signs. And since 1971, the whole of the old town and much of its setting has very rightly been designated under the Civic Amenities Act of 1967 as a conservation area. In the defense of our old towns, that act is without a doubt the most effective piece of legislation so far, and its powers should be used to the full. Preserve what is worth preserving. Watch the building lines. Wherever possible, use the local materials and avoid naked concrete, because concrete never weathers, it only cracks and stains and in time looks shabby. Well, those are some of the precepts to follow if we want to keep places like Richmond looking worthy of their past.